Let's take a couple of minutes here to talk about Telnet and SSH. You're introduced to Telnet very early in your CCNA studies, and it's a really common way to communicate with remote routers. It certainly beats driving or flying to the physical location of that router. And having had to drive to one at 2 in the morning because the passwords weren't set up correctly, I'm a bit of a Telnet nut. Now, with Telnet though, it works really well. And, I'm a secure guy, as far as my network security goes, but I use Telnet all the time. I use it here in the course, and it's very easily customized to control access, but there's one small problem. Everything it sends is unencrypted. All of the data, all of the passwords, everything. Now, SSH is going to encrypt all of the data, including the passwords, which is obviously a huge improvement over Telnet. You could even use the scientific word humongous. I mean, it is a big improvement. So if that's the case, why is Chris Bryant and a lot of other people out there, still using Telnet? Well, SSH requires a little more work, but you and I certainly aren't afraid of that. The config is a couple of commands longer, big deal. But it might require hardware that you don't have, or it might just be beyond your router's capabilities. Not every router out there is SSH compatible. So let's go ahead and take a look at the similarities and differences between the two, because with both of these we're still working with the VTY lines either way at the end. Now with Telnet, you've probably seen this configuration before. Matter of fact, I know you have with your CCNA, that you can allow the use of a single password for entry. You can just put login and then a password on all the VTY lines. This is obviously not a good idea in production networks, and I talked about this a bit with the human element discussion earlier. Sometimes even just wanting to change that Telnet password can be a pain in a larger company, but you got to do it. You don't want people outside your company just knowing what that password is. Well, SSH doesn't even allow that to happen. SSH requires the creation of a username password combination. You probably saw that in your NA studies too, the username and then whatever you want and then password right after it. We're going to configure that on the live equipment here shortly, so you'll see that in action. But the great thing about the username password combination is that there's much greater accountability all the way around. First off, if either the username or the password fails, the entire login fails. So if my username is Chris, my password is Bryant, and I put Chris in for both, it's going to fail my login. Also, when you're using tracking tools, maybe using accounting from AAA, there's some accountability. By looking in your logs who logged in. And there can't be any of this, gee, someone just knew the password and they telnet it in from some IP address and we don't know who it is. So the accountability is a lot higher. What we're going to see in action here in a minute or two is both a Telnet lab and an SSH lab. They're both going to be pretty short labs. There's not a lot going on, but I can practically guarantee you this is going to show up on your exam and definitely will show up in your production networks. Thankfully for us, Telnet is not enabled by default. That would not be a good thing if all Cisco routers shipped and Telnet was enabled and the password was Cisco or admin. Passwords and login method, of course, they're always going to go on the VTY lines. Incoming users are placed into user exec mode by default, which is where they really can't do anything. Now you may want that, but if you're logging in as the network admin and you're trying to log in at 2 in the morning, perhaps you would like to be able to actually configure the router from where you are. Well, in that case, you've got to know the enable password in order to get into higher modes. And if an enable password in that situation has not been set, tough. You're not going to be able to get past user exec mode. You're not going to be able to configure the router. Now you can use the enable password, or you could also assign a user privilege level 15. And if you do that, when they log in, they will not be asked for the enable password in order to get into enable mode. They'll just be put into that immediately. So then they do a conf t from there and start configuring. Now that level can be assigned on a per user level, or it can be assigned to the VTY lines themselves. Now that of course is a little bit dangerous because that means that anybody who knows the password, your Telnet password, is going to be given privilege level 15 as soon as they log in, and they can do just about anything they want. something to watch out for. Now our SSH to-do list is a little bit longer because we have certain things we have to do, certain commands we have to know. And actually, as you'll see, there's a certain order to these. Now first off, here's the second point, sounds odd, but you have to name the router. You can't just leave it at the default of router. You may never run into that unless you're configuring it from scratch. But to run SSH, you got to name the router. You also have to define a domain name with the IP domain name command. Then you have to generate keys with crypto key generate RSA. And generally, you're not going to accept the defaults of this command, and we'll see that in action here in the lab in a few minutes. You could, but there's a little warning given about how long it might take, and I just want to show you it's just not that long to wait. You also have to prompt the user, as I mentioned, for a username password combination rather than just a simple password, a la many Telnet configurations. So really, that's the theory of Telnet SSH. Those are the differences, and you've got similarities and differences right here. You've got a little Telnet to-do list. We're going to see that in action, and a little SSH to-do list as well. We're going to be working mostly from the command line here, but we'll get CCP in there as well. Just have a look around. So what I'm going to do is stop the recording here, and when you come back, we're going to start a Telnet lab, and then we'll run an SSH lab right after that. So I'll see you at the Telnet lab.